Thank you so much for joining us today in our senior research project, or presenting our senior research project. We are the Sustainability Science Practicum team of the fall of 2020, and we are very excited to share this with you today. Before we get started, we'd love to introduce ourselves, just so you know who's popping up on the screen. I'm Gracie Andres.
I'm Bennett Burkholder.
I'm Connor Danahy.
I'm Anna Stewart.
I'm Bennett Dean.
I'm Ben Hansberger.
And I'm Mariah Barr.
And we also have Emily Thomas as part of our team, but unfortunately she could not join us today. To give a little overview of what we're going to be talking about during this presentation, we're first going to go over our goal that we set with the Assistant City Manager and Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Greenville, Michael Frickson. We set it at the beginning of the year. We'll go over what we all kind of wanted to get out of it and how much we needed to get for the City of Greenville. Then we're going to go into the background on sustainability and how our team contextualized it and how that kind of went through our entire semester of research. We're going to go in the background of sustainability and the established frameworks that we initially looked at with the City of Greenville, which were the Amsterdam City Donut, Lead for Cities and Communities, and the Sustainable Development Goals. And then after this, after assessing all of our strengths and weaknesses within these frameworks, we are going to go into our own framework that we developed, which are the Practicum Indicators for Environmental and Social Sustainability, or PIEs, which we're very excited to show you today. And then we're going to go into the connections that we saw to the Greenville 2040 Comprehensive Plan. What were the strengths, what were the weaknesses, where are points of intervention for Greenville in the future? And then from that, we're going to offer some recommendations that we can give for Greenville for future development. And so the goal that we set at the beginning of the year was basically to align and apply different sustainability focused frameworks into the context of Greenville. And so we started off by looking at these three established frameworks: the Amsterdam City Donut, which is really a more localized version of Kate Raworth's Sustainability Donut, which we'll get into in a little bit. And so we just adapted this to Greenville and to see which indicators and which situations would fit it best. And then we went into Lead for Cities and Communities and filled in necessary gaps that last year's practicum group completed or weren't able to complete. And then from these two, since they're very localized frameworks, very data-driven, we needed to get a more globalized perspective of Greenville and how we could be doing and connecting with other cities or other states. And that's why we decided to look at the Sustainable Development Goals. And then after looking at these three frameworks and their indicators within them, we looked at the strengths and weaknesses of each and developed the practicum indicators for environmental and social sustainability. And through our analysis of all of this, we needed to make sure that we were maintaining and really focusing on the three main parts of the Greenville 2040 Comprehensive Plan, which was green space in the environment, transportation, and affordable housing, all of which are vital parts when discussing sustainability in the long term. And the way that we framed sustainability throughout the semester was the way that the Brundtland Commission has framed it. It's making sure that we don't compromise the needs of those in the future and without compromising our own. We need to make sure that we're meeting ecological needs, meeting social needs, meeting economic needs, meeting the things that people need in their life. And so from this definition, we also really focused on Kate Raworth's donut, which is on the top right of the screen, which focuses on the interconnections between an ecological and natural system and the social systems. And so these social foundations that we see in the middle of the donut, which is health and food and jobs and gender equality and social equity, are these things that people need in life to feel fulfillment, to get the things that they need for their person. And if we meet these foundations of life, that's one part of the donut that we have fulfilled. But we need to be meeting these while not exceeding an ecological boundary, while not taking out too much fresh water, not changing the land too much to a certain extent for human use, making sure that through development we're cognizant of nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. And so with these two working together and in conjunction with each other, there's a possibility that we can live in a safe and just operating space for humanity. So these interconnections between a natural system and a human system are extremely important when discussing sustainability. But in the normal framing of sustainability, you can kind of think of the triple bottom line having these only three components of sustainability that are their own component and all connect in the middle. It's not typically seen as a nested system, but we recognized as a group that it's very important to recognize that the economic system, which operates within society, which is a part of these social foundations, is operating within an environmental boundary and is operating within a world that has a limited amount of resources, and we need to be aware of this. And so recognizing the interconnectedness and the nestedness, we were able to frame sustainability in this light and keep it this way through our entire research.
Hey everybody, Bennett here. I'm going to speak a little bit about the frameworks that we covered throughout our practicum. Besides just the donut framework, we covered the New Amsterdam City donut framework, which is based on Kate Raworth's donut. What's interesting about this framework is that it specifically cuts up the framework into 4 specific sections. 2 of those sections being social local and social ecological, while 2 other sections being social global and ecological global. And what this means is that society has an impact on locality on the global stage and at like a city level stage, and its ecology as well. Local societies can also affect global society as a whole. The second framework that we covered was LEAD for cities and communities. It is a point system used to rate buildings and cities, and it incorporates a numbering process and indicators to just whatever is being graded. And we can see some of the categories here on the slide: integrative processes, water consumption, materials and resources. And there are different certification levels that play out, being silver, gold, and platinum certified. And we sort of used the LEAD framework in generating our own framework, which we will cover later in PIES. The third framework that we covered were the Sustainable Development Goals. There are a lot more targets and a lot more goals in this framework than maybe in some of the other frameworks. And a lot of these targets and goals specifically apply to global scenarios. Many of the goals are hard to implement at a city level basis, so only a few of these indicators and targets made it into our PIES framework. Here we can see our driving paradigm for PIES. Similarly to what Gracie covered, it is a nested system and it is not based on a triple bottom line. You can see that our thought process is, what is a thriving Greenville? And layered into the thriving Greenville is the environment, and within our environment is society, and within our society is economy. In PIES, we have 13 subcategories, which can be seen in the very, very center: housing, transportation, equity, and political voice. These are some of the examples. Outside of that, we have 5 main categories: enabled, powered, connected, healthy, and ecological. And these main 13 subcategories fall within all 5 of the other main categories. So something like housing could be found in connected and healthy, or healthy within the subcategories could be found in healthy and ecological, or even in empowered. Next, I'm going to cover one of the sections for PIES. Here we can see enabled, and our definition of enabled is to provide the means and opportunity for a quality of life. Some of the indicators that fall underneath enabled are jobs and income, housing, energy, and education, as we will see in the next few slides. Here's a breakdown of how our grading system works. Here we see enabled, the category. We see that Greenville, from its indicators, earned 25% of points that it could earn, and then there were 75% of points remaining, and that is in the outer white circle. On the inner white circle, we can see that of the points that were earned 25%, housing earned 25% of those points, and education earned 75% of those points. Jobs and income and energy earned 0. Enabled is also one of the categories that Greenville did the worst in when we were doing a measurement for pies. Some of the indicators for pies that we used in this enabled category are seen to the right of this graph. We can see jobs and income. One of the examples that we used was less than or equal to 4% of population is unemployed. Greenville didn't meet this requirement or threshold. As of 2020, 11.9% of Greenville was unemployed. And in all the categories, for a category to get points, it either meets or doesn't meet a specific threshold. And so it's a yes or no question, and that's how the points are allocated. Housing, an example is median gross rent as percent of household income, less than or equal to 20%, and Greenville also did not meet this threshold. Energy, net municipal GHG emissions in thousands of CO2s, equivalent to an ARC score of higher than 40%. Now you might be asking what an ARC score is. That's something that LEED uses to score and grade its points. And that's an example of how LEED was used in pies. Greenville had 83,000 tons of CO2 in 2018. However, we don't know how that scores on the ARC score for LEED. If we had access, then it may or may not meet that. But for the purposes of our study, we just said no, Greenville does not meet it. Education, all communities fall within 5% of the average graduation rate, and Greenville did not meet this. Inclusiveingreenville.org reported that multiple communities don't meet this threshold.
Hey everyone, this is Connor Danahy talking again. So we're now moving on to the empowered category, one of the 5 larger categories in the PIES framework. We define empowered as having the knowledge, confidence, and ability to make decisions and have control over one's life situation. Within this larger category of empowered, we have the 4 smaller categories of political voice, equity, education, and energy. Okay, so I'll start with the analysis here. In the empowered category, Greenville's only earned 50% of the points available. And once again, within that, in the smaller circle in the middle, of those points earned, 43% of those were because of education, 29% because of energy, 14% because of political voice and equity. And I'll move on to some of the examples here. Political voice on the right there, our threshold was greater than or equal to 60% of eligible voters cast their ballot. Now, we couldn't find truly accurate data for the city of Greenville, but we did find data for the county, and that was 71.65%. So Greenville would meet that category or that threshold. In terms of equity, we looked at the Gini index, which is essentially a measurement of income inequality between 0 and 1 or 0 and 100%. 0 or 0% represents perfect equality, while 1 or 100% represents maximum inequality. So the lower the number is essentially the better in this case. Greenville got a 46 on the Gini index, which is it's okay, I would say. And moving on to education, our threshold was 90% of the population have completed a high school education. In Greenville, this is true, so they got the point for that. In terms of energy, our example was access to dynamic electricity service pricing. Greenville did get this through Duke Energy because Duke Energy offers service pricing changes based on on-peak and off-peak energy usage in the city.
So this is Anna, and I'm going to discuss the connected category. The definition that we have for this is linking communities together physically and virtually to foster solidarity. And this includes the transportation, housing, green space, and energy subcategories. So starting off with the diagram, we can see that the outer circle shows that 55% of the points were earned for this category, with 45% remaining. And the inner circle shows that transportation primarily contributed to the points being earned, with 50% of those points, with energy, green space, and housing making up much smaller percentages. Looking at the examples, for energy, our example was access to grid reliability monitoring data, which Greenville does have through Duke Energy, so a point was earned for this one. For green space, our example is that 70% of all housing units have to be within half a mile of some sort of green space. Greenville didn't earn a point for this one due to lack of data. For transportation, the example that we have is a lead indicator where at least 2% of all public parking spaces need to be equipped with infrastructure to accommodate electric cars. Greenville didn't earn a point for this one because only 0.2% of all public parking spaces had infrastructure to accommodate electric cars. And then our example for housing is a comprehensive housing plan is adopted for the city, which can be seen within the Greenville 2040 plan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bennett Dean, and I'm going to talk about the healthy category. So after analyzing the city of Greenville through multiple lenses, we knew that healthy was a necessary element of our framework. We wanted to make sure that the healthy category applies to both social and environmental health. So this means it's found on both the inside and the outside of the Rayworth donut model. We define healthy as maximizing well-being through physical, mental, and emotional wellness. Sustainability is a transdisciplinary science. So that means there are underlying connections to transportation and congestion, energy, education, affordable housing, and so on. We've narrowed our focus to look at health, green space, food, and water. And these were all important elements that we found in the SDGs, LEAD, and the donut model. The center of the circle here shows Greenville's progress. So you can see that 50% of the indicators were achieved for water, 25% achieved for food, 13% achieved for green space, and 12% achieved for general health. Given our current indicators and data, Greenville earned 62% of the potential points for the healthy category. This makes it the most successful of the 5 overall categories, although there's still points to achieve in both social and ecological progress to be made. The Greenville 2040 plan talks a lot about improving city green spaces, such as their example of Unity Park. So Greenville is on the right track to targeting the weakest aspect of the healthy category.
Good afternoon. This is Ben Hansberger. I worked on the ecological category. We defined ecological as ensuring the health of the environment so that all life can thrive. The subcategories below this are air, land cover, water, and green space. As we can see, 58% of the points possible were earned and 42% are remaining. Interesting, when we look at the inner circle of this diagram, we see that the categories are relatively equal, although land cover is kind of, bringing up the bulk majority of the points. And this is something we kind of want to see, in the future as this framework is utilized and developed and Greenville becomes a more sustainable city. We want to see that green space, air, water, and land cover are all sharing equal percentages of the points earned. For some examples that we use in this, air, we use a toxic release inventory. Greenville met this indicator and had 960.6 pounds of toxic release per square mile. In conserved urban green space above 500 square feet per capita, we also met this indicator. Additionally, I think it's important to note that the example indicators we see on the right are not, all encompassing. There are obviously a lot more indicators built into, for say land cover or green space. And we can go ahead and move forward. So here's kind of the big picture that we've noticed. And this kind of compares the categories to one another. As Bennett mentioned, we can see that the healthy category is performing quite well as opposed to the other categories, with ecological lagging behind a little bit and enabled being the category that needs to be most focused on. When we look at the total points earned and total points remaining, it's about 50-50. However, there is one extra point remaining. So obviously Greenville's made a lot of progress. However, there is progress still to be made. And again, we can see on the right just how many, the percentages of, which indicators earned what, healthy being the most, connected being the second most, and power being the third, and so on. And we can go ahead and continue. So here is our big blown up giant model. So we're looking at kind of two facets of this. The outer shell is the points remaining for all of the individual subcategories. So 3 points remaining in air here. There might be 1 point remaining in land cover in one area, and there also might be 1 point remaining in land cover within, connected, 1 point remaining within healthy. So the outer barrier is kind of where we need to work on, where we need to focus on. And the inner barrier, in a sense, is what's protecting Greenville and keeping it a sustainable city. So we can kind of utilize the inner barrier to see what works to kind of affect the outer shell, so to speak.
Hi, this is Mariah speaking. We were able to connect our own framework to the Greenville 2040 plan, and we found many connections, such as a focus on affordable housing opportunities and increasing density, an emphasis on the transportation system and opportunities to decrease traffic congestion, and per capita square foot of parks is very high compared to other threshold measurements. The Greenville 2040 plan also had a focus on environmental conservation via protection of vacant land and an emphasis on job growth to reduce income inequality. However, we did identify multiple opportunities for improvement, such as a lack of focus on energy, food, water, and the ecological sector. We believe that the Greenville 2040 plan would benefit from elaborating on and further incorporating inclusivity within their economic growth model and making a commitment to no net loss of tree canopy coverage. So our final recommendations for the city of Greenville are to increase accessibility of water and sanitation to all residents, to decrease reliance on cars by incorporated mixed-use developments, as well as public and non-motorized transportation. We want the city of Greenville to focus infill development on mixed-use and mixed-income development, to consider analyzing existing and future development through an equity or equality lens, and to increase infrastructure to accommodate more electric cars.
This concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for taking the time to participate in Ferment Engaged.